the city of Pittsburgh never imagined that it would be the location of the worst anti-Semitic act in American history. I believe that Pittsburgh responded in a way that really speaks volumes to the city itself.
I know there's still a lot of trauma that people are dealing with. I also think there's a lot of gratitude. I think that people are grateful here in Squirrel Hill for the amount of care and concern that folks from all around the world showed for us, and a strong desire to build bridges, especially with communities that are different from ours, that don't look or think like ours, and to build that foundation of trust so we can truly be stronger going forward.
In the aftermath, there was a heightened sense of community that was accelerated by the horrific loss and events. The Jewish community's relationship with other ethnic communities and religious communities, the bonds there are stronger than they ever were.
It knocked us to our knees. Have spent these past 2 years slowly getting back up, but I do believe that we were able to show that, as we say in Pittsburgh, we're stronger than hate.
People came together, the whole community came together, people developed new relationships, people looked for opportunities to stand together against racism, white nationalism, violence, and I was inspired and continue to be inspired 2 years later at how much people are willing to try new things, meet new people, and together.
Real strength comes from the kindness and the empathy that we're able to share. And that real strength has been shown not only on that horrific day, but in the 2 years since, in a community that would not allow itself to be divided by hate, nor would let hate win in any type of rhetoric or narrative, but instead showed that the true way to beat hate is through love.
Joyce Feinberg, Richard Godfrey, Rose Mallinger, Jerry Rabinowitz, Cecil Rosenthal, David Rosenthal, Bernice Simon, Sylvan Simon, Daniel Stein, Melvin Wax, Irving Younger. On the second anniversary of the tragic October day, we honor the 11 lives lost to the single deadliest anti-Semitic attack in US history. We remember them, and we honor their memory with our commitment to working to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to securing justice and fair treatment for all. Thank you all for being here on this, the second anniversary of the Tree of Life attack. I want to also welcome our guest, Myrna Pérez, who I've had the pleasure of working with for, I guess, probably the last 2 months now, in an endeavor that that goes to the heart of our mission. Myrna is with the Brennan Center for Justice. She is the director of the Brennan Center's Voting Rights and Election Program and leads the program's research, advocacy, and litigation work nationwide. She's an expert on voting rights and election administration. Her work has been featured in media outlets across the country. She's also ADL's lead counsel in ADL Southwest, ADL Austin, ADL Texoma et al. Versus Governor Abbott in his official capacity. This is a lawsuit that was filed on October 5th, which challenges Governor Greg Abbott's order limiting drop-off sites for absentee ballots to one per county prior to Election Day. Myrna, thank you for taking time from what I know is an extraordinarily hectic schedule for spending some time with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It really is an honor to represent ADL, and I will say also as a person of faith myself, albeit a different faith. It really means a lot that ADL always shows up for other organizations, and it's something that as a a professor of law and as a professor who incorporates a lot of social justice movements and social history, it is not lost on me what a backbone and source of support ADL has been for all of the major advancements in civil rights. And my hope is that we felt some of the love and support in spades after the Tree of Life attack. I know that my own church did stuff with a number of the other synagogues in our neighborhood because we felt like that was the least we could do. And irrespective of background, irrespective of faith, we all share a common humanity and a love for a world in which we can live and worship peacefully and respectfully and coextensively.
Thank you, and thank you for those comments. And as I said, it has been a pleasure to work with you and the Brennan Center. And I would like for you to talk about the Brennan Center, but first, if you could just give us a status update on where we are in this litigation.
Well, we filed papers last night, which may be the end of the line. It's a little bit too early to tell. The state sought a ruling from the Texas Supreme Court that would lift the injunction in place. And for those of you who aren't steeped in legal terms, that's basically just a fancy way of saying, we had won earlier. The court that had resolved, the court had looked at our position and decided that it was illegal for Governor Abbott to limit the number of ballot return locations to just one place. But Texas had moved to put that win in a holding pattern until later courts were able to examine the issue. And so what Texas tried to do was get the Supreme Court to say that holding pattern should continue. And we last night filed papers to say, nope, the holding pattern should not continue. The victory that we had won should be allowed to go into effect. And what we don't know what's going to happen is whether or not the court is going to just decide that one procedural matter, or whether or not the court is going to decide who wins ultimately. And it's a little bit of a waiting game because, as you guys know, the election is in 7 days. And if we don't have a decision soon, then it doesn't matter if we were right or wrong on the law, right? We're not going to be able to have an impact. So we're hopeful the court will decide this quickly and that we'll be able to get these ballot return locations up and running and with enough time to help enough people.
And I do want to kind of ask you about the idea of impact, because obviously we do want to have these locations up and running in advance of the election, but there are other issues at play that we're trying to address, and in terms of not just this issue, but also future issues. And so I can wonder if you could sort of address how this particular case might impact other efforts that other people may try to impact keeping people from having easy access to the ballot.
Well, it's funny because I don't know, Mark, if you've reminded people that I am actually from Texas. So like I was
getting there, but yes, please.
Well,
you've got the yellow rose colors of Texas.
Yeah,
so.
the reason I say that is because I do think that Texas is undergoing a shift and a change in a way that I certainly don't think I've seen in my lifetime. And I think that there are some politicians scared and they're trying to use the election system as a job security plan for them and their friends because they see the writing on the wall. And our hope is that if we can get some decisions that put some guardrails on how far they can move, then in future elections, people won't be inspired to try this. And my ultimate goal is that there will be so many voters saying in a clear voice in one direction that we want free, fair, and accessible elections so that all politicians think that voter suppression is toxic. Like there was a time where people from both sides of the aisle would think that it was in their political self-interest to have accessible polls. And they didn't want to be anywhere near the idea of putting barriers in front of the ballot box. And I think we need to move as quickly as we can back to that time where the voters are in a position where we're saying, like, look, you know, I may not agree with my neighbor, but no way am I going to let you make it harder for them to vote just because you want you and your friends to keep getting elected. And I think that is a fight that we need to be having, not in the courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. And we need to not be insouciant about that fight. That's a fight we need to have every day. We need to teach it in our Sunday schools. We need to teach it in our classes. We needed to, you know, especially as places like Texas are cutting back on like civics education and the like, people aren't having programs like I did when I was in like doing debate where you were discussing like headier normative issues. I think it's really, really important that we not take for granted the idea that our democracy works best when it includes all of us and that we all benefit from a robust, a participatory, and an inclusive democracy.
And I should add, not only from Texas, but we were also both from San Antonio.
Yes.
So I just wanted to also get that out. This is not the only voter suppression case that you're involved in. Obviously, you've been engaged in these cases all over the country. And so just curious, how many cases have you been litigating just this year in 2020? I
have to do a count. We're approaching at least 10 that I can think of, and that's not even including amicus briefs. Some of them have been longer. I tend to get more involved in these cases that aren't these like quick hits, but we're having to do a bunch of quick hits because there's voter suppression happening in places that we count, that we care about. One of our big lawsuits was in Florida where we were defending the win that had been achieved by the civil rights community of ending permanent disenfranchisement in Florida. And then the legislature came in and tried to undercut a very popular constitutional amendment that ended permanent disenfranchisement. And the way the legislature did that is by making sure that the word sentence included any fees, fines, or restitutions that you might have. And anybody that spent any appreciable time in prison or has the stain or the stigma of having a felony marked next to them is going to have very low job prospects. So lots and lots of people, even long after they've served their time, still have fees, fines, and obligations. And that was another case where we had been doing really, really well and then got a disappointing opinion in the 11th Circuit. And so we're trying to be creative. I mean, I think this is an environment that is really going to test our judiciary. And I also think it's going to test organizations and advocates because we need to make sure that we are not putting all of our hope into a judiciary for making some of these public cases where we're going to need to, again, continue to go to the people and make sure that we're flexing our political muscles to have legislatures do the right thing.
And my caveat to this question is that this is not a partisan question in any way, because every study that I've seen, and we just had Professor Bob Stein on from Rice University, who's done a lot of research on this, that any efforts that enhance voter participation, nothing has shown that they benefit one party over the other. Whether it's mail-in ballot initiatives or whatever, it seems that neither party has a benefit from more people voting. And so it's often puzzling. But my question is, these efforts, while not always ultimately successful in the courts, do you see a correlation between these efforts and what seems to be greater voter participation that we're seeing in this election?
That's a very interesting question, and it's very popular because depending on who you are, that kind of position can be exploited. So for example, someone will pass a really, really strict photo ID law, one that we know is going to disenfranchise some persons in the population that don't have the kind of required ID. And then the other side, when we're in there challenging it, will say, but look, turnout's up. How could turnout be up? And the answer is actually not that complicated. It can be true that there are some people going to be cut out of the electoral process because of a barrier. And then there are other people that will overwhelm that number. And either because they were mad that someone was trying to cut the voting rights, they felt really inspired to show up, or that they just felt like they needed to take a stand on this. But the actual question should be, well, what would turnout have looked like had we not disenfranchised a segment of the population? And one of the things that I'm always reminding people is that it's not a democracy for most of us, it's a democracy for all of us. And so we are weakened as a democratic body when there are large numbers of us not participating, especially when they have shared ideas. And the way that I think about it now is that our country is facing a reckoning for things that we have done and things that we have left undone in our nation's history, especially with respect to race and racial equality and racial justice. And we are not going to get ourselves out of this position unless we are able to leverage the lived experiences and the expertise of people who are closest to the pain. And we are not going to get the right kind of policy outcomes unless we hear from all of us. And so I think you can't look at statewide numbers to assess whether or not voter suppression is real, because it can still be real and you can still have a greater number of people turn out than were suppressed. But our democracy is still losing out on the people that were cut out.
Well, and that brings up a question that one of the participants asked, which is, why don't we have national voting standards?
That is a great question. We're trying to do so in the next Congress. I think we need to be careful about how we talk about that. Like, I think what we do want as a country is national minimum standards, saying no matter where you are, this has to be the baseline of what you provide. But if you want to be an enterprising state, you can do better than that. Right? Like, we don't want there to be a race to the bottom. People to say you're going to have a floor of protections and everything else that the state may want to innovate, they're encouraged and free to do so. I think that's what federalism requires. I think that's what our Constitution permits. But in that vein, we do have a piece of legislation called the For the People Act. Y'all might have heard it be called HR 1. It was called HR 1 because it was the first piece of legislation that the House wanted to take up. And it did pass. It has not passed the Senate. It's an omnibus piece that covers much of the ills of that has been plaguing our elections for the last 10 years. And so HR 1 covered, coupled with the Voting Rights Act, which is to try and restore the Voting Rights Act to its prior strength before it was weakened by the Supreme Court. Together, those two things should be the top legislative agenda, in my mind, for all organizations across the country, because if we don't fix voting reform, then none of our agendas are going to be effective, something we can effectuate. Like, if you care about climate control, not going to happen until we have voting reform.
Right. It's a brilliant point. That's a great point. We just have a little bit of time left, and I would curious, and I think some of the other folks would be as well, is what brought you into this area of law?
That's an interesting question. For a long part of my life, I thought I was going to do international anti-poverty work. That's what my heart speaks to me to do that. I spend a lot of time doing anti-hunger work on my own time, on my free time, through my church and through other churches. But I spent a summer at the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund in San Antonio, and that really hit home for me the way in which voting rights were really critical to getting other agendas being accomplished. And I liked how it was both hard, because it is challenging to figure out, like, how do you strike the right line between access and security, or when you are drawing district lines, what happens when you draw the line this way versus when you draw the line that way, and at what point are you impermissibly hurting some people at the expense of others? So I like the intellectual challenge of it. But also, I really love the idea of voting. I've got a very sort of ecumenical spirit. I've got a very communitarian spirit. And I really like the idea that it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor or black or white or educated or not. When you step into that ballot box, your vote is going to matter as much as somebody else. It feels like it's a great equalizing force. And it's such a way to transform someone literally from being on the sidelines to having some impact on their own faith and their own destiny. And that really spoke to my heart.
Well, you've devoted your career to this and become one of the foremost experts in the country. And as I said, it has really been an honor and pleasure to work with you and the Brennan Center. Can you just tell everybody a little bit about the Brennan Center? Certainly,
Sure.
The election work is part of what they do, but perhaps maybe share a little bit about the full breadth of the organization.
Sure. So the Brennan Center is a nonpartisan nonprofit that works to reform systems of democracy and justice. We're based in New York City. We have a DC office. We are named after the great Supreme Court Justice William Brennan, who made famous the idea of a living constitution. And by that, he meant like we didn't want to have a constitution where the words were frozen in time, but rather we understood it to be something that was dynamic, that was able to be responsive to the challenges of the moment. And the best part about my job is that we work in a very interdisciplinary way. So I will spend over the course of a year about as much time, work in state houses to try and get legislation passed, as I will in courtrooms, as I will behind my desk trying to run econometric analysis or trying to support my team members that are doing so, as I will be talking to groups like y'all or like the media. I'm very into the idea of like whole lawyering, because I don't think we have very many problems that are going to be fixed with one quick hit in one tool. I think we need to have an expanded toolkit, and we need to look at every problem and figure out what is it that we need to do to actually be able to change hearts and minds. And sometimes you need the moral force of a lawsuit, but sometimes you also need a really insightful op-ed, or sometimes you need like hard-hitting research, or you need a bill passed that makes it so, and then people get used to it, so they change their ideas. So, you should tell all of the young people in your life that we take interns. We are one of the few people in New York City that actually pay them. So that I hope is useful to folks that have college people in their lives. And we're doing the work as in the trenches as best we can, day in and day out. We have teams that work on liberty and security, and we have teams that work on over incarceration.
And by the way, I should add that not only is it a great pleasure to work with you guys because of the brilliant legal work that y'all have done, but you use y'all correctly. And when you send, your time request, you actually will include both Eastern and Central time. And that's how I knew that you were from Texas, because East Coasters will just assume, that everything's in East Coast.
Yeah, so. Like just as a little aside, I remember when I went to college, and like being from Texas, I know state chauvinism, right? Like, I mean, I walked in with my like, don't mess with Texas and my boots. And then I was like, oh my God, these Texans have nothing on New York. Who like just do not seem to understand that the world does not work just the way that they see them.
They're lovely people, but
yeah, I actually think New Yorkers have Texans beat.
And by the way, I'm sure a number of you people here I know originate from New York, and so please, it's all in good fun.
All in good.
Yeah. So one last question, which is with regard, there's been. We're dealing with this in our own litigation. And in the previous litigation that we were involved in, with regard to mail-in ballots, this has become just a huge issue nationwide. And I'm just wondering if you have sort of any general thoughts in terms of how much of an issue do you think this will be, on November 4th?
I I think we all should be prepared for some hiccups on election day. I think the country has done so much. The field has done so much. We have moved so far since like March, when everything first started shutting down. But a lot of it was because we had to play catch up because of something we should have done a long time ago and didn't do. Like, we are facing a once in a century pandemic right now, but next year it may be weather, and the year after that it may be foreign cyber criminals crippling our infrastructure. We need to have the appropriate plans and preparedness in place to be able to be adaptable to whatever crisis the country has at us. And I think that there can be no dispute that vote by mail needs to be one of the things that's on the table to handle a problem. And I think we can debate all day long about which one's better, in person or, or vote by mail, and how much we should do of it and who should have it. But I think to be able to account for the fact that we need election mechanisms, or we need election systems that are diversified against risk, should be a no-brainer. It should be something that all of us get behind. And my hope is that we learn from this and not have to go through this again.
Terrific. Well, that'll have to be the last word. Myrna, thank you so much for taking time to be with us and sharing your thoughts. And thanks everybody for being here for Toubin Talks. I will see you guys next week, next Tuesday. Stay well. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.